CHINUA ACHEBE, A Man of the People. First published in 1966.
For Chris.
Chapter 1. No one can deny that Chief the Honorable M.A. Nanga, MP, was the most approachable politician in the country. Whether you asked in the city or in his home, village, Anata, they would tell you he was a man of the people. I have to admit this from the onset, or else the story I'm going to tell will make no sense. That afternoon he was due to address the staff and students of the Anata Grammar School where I was teaching at the time. But as usual in those highly political times, the villagers moved in and virtually took over. The assembly hall must have carried well over thrice its capacity. Many villagers sat on the floor, right up to the foot of the dais.
I
took one look and decided it was just as well we had to stay outside, at least for the moment. 5 or 6 dancing groups were performing at different points in the compound. The popular Ego Women's Party wore a new uniform of expensive Accra cloth. In spite of the din, you could still hear as clear as a bird the high, powered voice of their soloist, whom they admiringly nicknamed Gramophone. Personally, I don't care too much for our women's dancing, but you just had to listen whenever Gramophone sang. She was now praising Micah's handsomeness, which she likened to the perfect, sculpted beauty of a carved eagle, and his popularity, which would be the envy of the proverbial traveler to distant places who must not cultivate enmity on his route. Micah was of course Chief the Honorable M.A. Nanga, MP. The arrival of the members of the Hunters Guild in full regalia caused a great stir. Even Gramophone stopped, at least for a while. These people never came out except at the funeral of one of their number or during some very special and outstanding event.
I
could not remember when I last saw them. They wielded their loaded guns as though they were playthings. Now and again 2 of them would meet in warriors' salute and knock the barrel of their guns together from left to right and again from right to left. Mothers grabbed their children and hurriedly dragged them away. Occasionally a hunter would take aim at a distant palm branch and break its midrib. The crowd applauded, but there were very few such shots. Most of the hunters reserved their precious powder to greet the minister's arrival. The price of gunpowder, like everything else, having doubled again and again in the 4 years since this government took control. As I stood in one corner of that vast tumult waiting for the arrival of the minister, I felt intense bitterness welling up in my mouth. Here were silly, ignorant villagers dancing themselves lame and waiting to blow off their gunpowder in honor of one of those that started the country off down the slopes of inflation. I wished for a miracle, for a voice of thunder, to hush this ridiculous festival and tell the poor, contemptible people 1 or 2 truths. But of course it would be quite useless. They were not only ignorant, but cynical. Tell them that this man had used his position to enrich himself, and they would ask you, as my father did, if you thought that a sensible man would spit out the juicy morsel that good fortune placed in his mouth. I had not always disliked Mr. Nanga. 16 years or so ago he had been my teacher in Standard 3, and I something like his favorite pupil.
I remember him then as
a popular, young and handsome teacher, most impressive in his uniform as scoutmaster. There was on one of the walls of the school a painting of a faultlessly handsome scoutmaster wearing an impeccable uniform. I am not sure that the art teacher who painted the picture had Mr. Nanga in mind. There was no facial resemblance, still we called it the picture of Mr. Nanga. It was enough that they were both handsome and that they were both impressive scoutmasters. This picture stood with arms folded across its chest and its raised right foot resting neatly and lightly on a perfectly cut tree stump. Bright red hibiscus flowers decorated the four corners of the frame, and below were inscribed the memorable words, "Not what I have, but what I do is my kingdom." That was in 1948. Nanga must have gone into politics soon afterwards and then won a seat in Parliament. It was easy in those days before we knew its cash price. I used to read about him in the papers some years later and even took something like pride in him.
At
that time I had just entered the university and was very active in the students' branch of the People's Organization Party. Then in 1960, something disgraceful happened in the party and I was completely disillusioned. At that time, Mr. Nanga was an unknown backbencher in the governing P.O.P.
A
General election was imminent. The P.O.P. was riding high in the country, and there was no fear of its not being returned. Its opponent, the Progressive Alliance Party, was weak and disorganized. Then came the slump in the international coffee market. Overnight, or so it seemed to us, the government had a dangerous financial crisis on its hands.
Coffee was
the prop of our economy, just as coffee farmers were the bulwark of the P.O.P. The Minister of Finance at the time was a first-rate economist with a Ph.D. in public finance. He presented to the cabinet a complete plan for dealing with the situation. The Prime Minister said no to the plan. He was not going to risk losing the election by cutting down the price paid to coffee planters at that critical moment. The National Bank should be instructed to print £15 million.
2/3 of the
cabinet supported the minister. The next morning the Prime Minister sacked them, and in the evening he broadcast to the nation. He said the dismissed ministers were conspirators and traitors who had teamed up with foreign saboteurs to destroy the new nation. I remember this broadcast very well. Of course, no one knew the truth at that time. The newspapers and the radio carried the Prime Minister's version of the story. We were very indignant. Our students' union met in emergency session and passed a vote of confidence in the leader and called for a detention law to deal with the miscreants. The whole country was behind the leader. Protest marches and demonstrations were staged upand down the land. It was at this point that I first noticed a new, dangerous, and sinister note in the universal outcry. The Daily Chronicle, an official organ of the P.O.P., had pointed out in an editorial that the miscreant gang, as the dismissed ministers were now called, were all university people and highly educated professional men. I have preserved a cutting of that editorial. Let us now and for all time extract from our body politic as a dentist extracts a stinking tooth all those decadent stooges versed in textbook economics and aping the white man's mannerisms and way of speaking. We are proud to be Africans. Our true leaders are not those intoxicated with their Oxford, Cambridge, or Harvard degrees, but those who speak the language of the people. Away with the damnable and expensive university education which only alienates an African from his rich and ancient culture and puts him above his people. This cry was taken up on all sides. Other newspapers pointed out that even in Britain, where the miscreant gang got its so-called education, a man need not be an economist to be Chancellor of the Exchequer or a doctor to be Minister of Health.
What
mattered was loyalty to the party. I was in the public gallery the day the Prime Minister received his overwhelming vote of confidence. And that was the day the truth finally came out. Only no one was listening. I remember the grief-stricken figure of the dismissed Minister of Finance as he led his team into the chamber and was loudly booed by members and the public.
That
week his car had been destroyed by angry mobs and his house stoned. Another dismissed minister had been pulled out of his car, beaten insensible, and dragged along the road for 50 yards, then tied hand and foot, gagged, and left by the roadside.
He was still in the
orthopedic hospital when the House met. That was my first and last visit to Parliament. It was also the only time I had set eyes on Mr. Nanga again since he taught me in 1948. The Prime Minister spoke for 3 hours, and his every other word was applauded. He was called the tiger, the lion, the one and only, the sky, the ocean, and many other names of praise. He said that the miscreant gang had been caught red-handed in their nefarious plot to overthrow the government of the people by the people, and for the people with the help of enemies abroad. They deserve to be hanged, shouted Mr. Nanga from the back benches. This interruption was so loud and clear that it appeared later under his own name in the Hansard. Throughout the session, he led the pack of backbench hounds straining their leash to get at their victims. If anyone had cared to sum up Mr. Nanga's interruptions, they would have made a good hour's continuous yelp. Perspiration poured down his face as he sprang up to interrupt or sat back to share in the derisive laughter of the hungry hyena. When the Prime Minister said that he had been stabbed in the back by the very ingrates he had pulled out of oblivion, some members were in tears. They have bitten the finger with which their mother fed them, said Mr. Nanga. This too was entered in the Hansard, a copy of which I have before me. It is impossible, however, to convey in cold print the electric atmosphere of that day. I cannot now recall exactly what my feelings were at that point. I suppose I thought the whole performance rather peculiar. You must remember that at that point no one had any reason to think there might be another side to the story. The Prime Minister was still talking. Then he made the now famous or infamous solemn declaration. From today we must watch and guard our hard-won freedom jealously. Never again must we entrust our destiny and the destiny of Africa to the hybrid class of Western-educated and snobbish intellectuals who will not hesitate to sell their mothers for a mess of pottage. Mr. Nanga pronounced the death sentence at least twice more, but this was not recorded, no doubt because his voice was lost in the general commotion. I remember the figure of Dr. McKean, the ex-Minister of Finance, as he got up to speak, tall, calm, sorrowful, and superior. I strained my ears to catch his words. The entire House, including the Prime Minister, tried to shout him down. It was a most unedifying spectacle. The speaker broke his mallet, ostensibly trying to maintain order, but you could see he was enjoying the commotion. The public gallery yelled down its abuses. Traitor, coward, doctor of fork your mother. This last was contributed from the gallery by the editor of the Daily Chronicle, who sat close to me. Encouraged, no doubt, by the volume of laughter this piece of witticism had earned him in the gallery, he proceeded the next morning to print it in his paper. The spelling is his. Although Dr. McKean read his speech, which was clearly prepared, the Hansard later carried a garbled version which made no sense at all. It said not a word about the plan to mint £15 million, which was perhaps to be expected, but why put into Dr. McKean's mouth words that he could not have spoken? In short, the Hansard boys wrote a completely new speech suitable to the boastful villain the ex-minister had become. For instance, they made him say he was a brilliant economist whose reputation was universally acclaimed in Europe. When I read this, I was in tears, and I don't cry all that easily. The reason I have gone into that shameful episode in such detail is to establish the fact that I had no reason to be enthusiastic about Chief the Honorable M.A. Nanga, who, seeing the empty ministerial seats, had yapped and snarled so shamelessly for the meaty prize. The proprietor and principal of the school was a thin, wiry fellow called Jonathan Nweech. He was very active in politics at the local council level and was always grumbling because his services to the P had not been rewarded with the usual prize appointment to some public corporation or other. But though disgruntled, he had not despaired, as witness his elaborate arrangements for the present reception. Perhaps he was hoping for something in the proposed new corporation which would take over the disposal of all government unserviceable property, like old mattresses, chairs, electric fans, disused typewriters, and other junk, which at present was auctioned by civil servants. I hope he gets appointed. It would have the merit of removing him from the school now and again. He insisted that the students should mount a guard of honor stretching from the main road to the school door, and the teachers too were to stand in a line at the end of the student queue to be introduced. Mr. Nwege, who regularly read such literature as toasts, how to propose them, was very meticulous about this kind of thing. I had objected vehemently to this, standing like school children at our staff meeting, thinking to rouse the other teachers. But the teachers in that school were all dead from the neck up. My friend and colleague Andrew Kadibi found it impossible to side with me because he and the minister came from the same village. Primitive loyalty, I call it. As soon as the minister's Cadillac arrived at the head of a long motorcade, the hunters dashed this way and that and let off their last shots, throwing their guns about with frightening freedom. The dancers capered and stamped, filling the dry season air with dust. Not even Grammar Phone's voice could now be heard over the tumult. The minister stepped out wearing damask and gold chains and acknowledging cheers with his ever-present fan of animal skin, which they said fanned away all evil designs and shafts of malevolence thrown at him by the wicked. The man was still as handsome and youthful-looking as ever, there was no doubt
about that.
The proprietor was now introducing him to the teachers, beginning with the senior tutor at the head of the line. Although I had not had time to scrutinize the senior tutor's person, I had no doubt he had traces of snuff as usual in his nostrils. The minister had a jovial word for everyone. You could never think, looking at him now, that his smile was anything but genuine. It seemed bloody-minded to be skeptical. Now it was my turn. I held out my hand somewhat stiffly. I did not have the slightest fear that he might remember me and had no intention of reminding him. Our hands met. I looked him straight in the face. The smile slowly creased up into lines of thought. He waved his left hand impatiently to silence the loquacious proprietor, who had begun the parrot formula he had repeated at least 15 times so far. I have the honor, sir, to introduce. That's right, said the minister, not to anyone in particular, but to some mechanism of memory inside his head. You are Audley. Yes, sir. Before the words were out of my mouth, he had thrown his arms round me, smothering me in his voluminous damask. You have a wonderful memory, I said. It's at least 15 years. He had now partly released me, although his left hand was resting on my shoulder. He turned slightly to the proprietor and announced proudly, I taught him in Standard 3, I said. That's right, he shouted. If he had just found his long-lost son, he could not have been more excited. He is one of the pillars of this school, said the proprietor, catching the infection, and saying the first good word about me since I had joined his school. Audley the Great, said the minister boyishly, and still out of breath. Where have you been all this time? I told him I had been to the university and had been teaching for the last 18 months. Good boy, he said. I knew he would go to a university. I used to tell the other boys in my class that Audley will one day be a great man, and they will be answering him, Sir, sir. Why did you not tell me when you left the university? That's very bad of you. You know. Well, I said happily, I'm ashamed to admit I know how busy a minister. Busy? Nonsense. Don't you know that minister means servant? Busy or no busy. He must see his master. Everybody around applauded and laughed. He slapped me again on the back and said I must not fail to see him at the end of the reception. If you fail, I will send my orderly to arrest. He became a hero in the eyes of the crowd. I was dazed. Everything around me became suddenly unreal. The voices receded to a vague border zone. I knew I ought to be angry with myself, but I wasn't. I found myself wondering whether perhaps I had been applying to politics stringent standards that didn't belong to it. When I came back to the immediate present, I heard the minister saying to another teacher, "That is very good." Sometimes I used to regret ever leaving the teaching field. Although I am a minister today, I can swear to God that I am not as happy as when I was a teacher. My memory is naturally good. That day it was perfect. I don't know how it happened, but I can recall every word the minister said on that occasion. I can repeat the entire speech he made later.
True to God who made me, he insisted.
I used to regret it. Teaching is a very noble profession. At this point, everybody just collapsed with laughter, not least of all the honorable minister himself, nor me, for that matter. The man's assurance was simply unbelievable. Only he could make such a risky joke or whatever he thought he was making at that time when teachers all over the country were in an ugly, rebellious
mood.
When the laughter died down, he put on a more serious face and confided to us, "You can rest assured that those of us in the cabinet who were once teachers are in full sympathy with you." "Once a teacher, always a teacher," said the senior tutor, adjusting the sleeves of his faded bottom box robes. Here, I said. I like to think that I meant it to be sarcastic. The man's charism had to be felt to be believed. If I were superstitious, I would say he had made a really potent charm of the variety called sweet face. Changing the subject slightly, the minister said, "Only teachers can make this excellent arrangement." Then, turning to the newspaper correspondent in his party, he said, "It is a mammoth crowd." The journalist whipped out his notebook and began to write. "It is an unprecedented crowd in the annals of Annada," said Mr. Nwege. "James, did you hear that?" the minister asked the journalist. "No, sir, what is it?" "This gentleman says it is the most unprecedented crowd in the annals of Annada." I
said.
This time I clearly meant my tongue to be in my cheek. "What is the gentleman's name?" Mr. Nwege called his name and spelt it and gave his full title of Principal and Proprietor of Annada Grammar School. Then he turned to the minister in an effort to pinpoint responsibility for the big crowds. "I had to visit every section of the village personally to tell them of to say of the minister's visit." We had now entered the assembly hall, and the minister and his party were conducted to their seats on the dais. The crowd raised a deafening shout of welcome. He waved his fan to the different parts of the hall. Then he turned to Mr. Nwege and said, "Thank you very much, thank you, sir." A huge, tough-looking member of the minister's entourage who stood with us at the back of the dais raised his voice and said, "You see when I to talk. How many minister fit hanser, sir, to any Tom, Dick, and Harry way senior them for age? I ask you, how many?" Everyone at the dais agreed that the minister was quite exceptional in this respect. A man of high position who still gave age the respect due to it. No doubt it was a measure of my changed, or shall we say changing, attitude to the minister that I found myself feeling a little embarrassed on his account for these fulsome praises flung at his face. Minister or no minister, he said, a man who is my senior must still be my senior. Other ministers and other people may do otherwise, but my motto is, do the right and shame the devil. Somehow I found myself admiring the man for his lack of modesty. For what is modesty but inverted pride? We all think we are first-class people. Modesty forbids us from saying so ourselves, though, presumably, not from wanting to hear it from others. Perhaps it was their impatience with this kind of hypocrisy that made men like Nanga successful politicians, while starry-eyed idealists strove vaingloriously to bring into politics niceties and delicate refinements that belonged elsewhere. While I thought about all this, perhaps not in these exact terms, the fulsome praises flowed all around the dais. Mr. Nwege took the opportunity to mount his old hobby horse. The minister's excellent behavior, he said, was due to the sound education he had received when education was education. Yes, said the minister, I used to tell them that standard 6 in those days is more than Cambridge today. Cambridge? Asked Mr. Nwege, who, like the minister, had the good old standard 6. Cambridge? Who dash frogcoat. You mean it is equal to B. A. today, if not more. With due apologies, said the minister, turning in my direction. Not at all, sir, I replied with equal good humor. I am applying for a postgraduate scholarship to bring myself up to Mr. Nwege's expectation. I remember that at that point the beautiful girl in the minister's party turned round on her chair to look at me. My eyes met hers, and she quickly turned round again. I think the minister noticed it. My private secretary has B.A. from Oxford, he said. He should have come with me on this tour, but I had some office work for him to do. By the way, Adelai, I think you are wasting your talent here. I want you to come to the capital and take up a strategic post in the civil service. We shouldn't leave everything to the Highland tribes. My secretary is. From there, our people must press for their fair share of the national cake. The hackneyed phrase national cake was getting to some of us for the first time, and so it was greeted with applause. Owner of book, cried one admirer, assigning in those 3 brief words the ownership of the white man's language to the honorable minister, who turned round and beamed on the speaker. That was when my friend Andrew Kadibi committed the unpardonable indiscretion of calling the minister the nickname he had worn as a teacher, MA-.
Opportunity.
It was particularly bad because Andrew and the minister were, from the look he gave Andrew then, reminded me of that other Nanga who had led the pack of hounds 4 years ago. Sorry, sir, said Andrew pitiably. Sorry for what? Snarled the minister. Don't mind the stupid boy, sir, said Mr. Nwege, greatly upset. This is what we were saying before. I think we better begin, said the minister, still frowning. Although Mr. Nwege had begun by saying that the distinguished guest needed no introduction, he had gone on all the same to talk for well over 20 minutes, largely in praise of himself and all he had done for the party in Annada and environs. The crowd became steadily more restive, especially when they noticed that the minister was looking at his watch. Loud grumbles began to reach the dais from the audience. Then clear voices telling Nwege to sit down and let the man they came to hear
talk.
Nwege ignored all these warning signs, a more insensitive man you never saw. Finally, one of the tough young men of the village stood up 10 feet or so away and shouted, "It is enough, or I shall push you down and take 3 pence." This did the trick. The laughter that went up must have been heard a mile away. Mr. Nwege's concluding remarks were completely lost. In fact, it was not until the minister rose to his feet that the laughter stopped. The story had it that many years ago, when Mr. Nwege was a poor, hungry elementary school teacher, that is before he built his own grammar school and became rich, but apparently still hungry. He had an old rickety bicycle of the kind the villa who gave the onomatopoeic name of Anakilaja. Needless to say, the brakes were very faulty. One day, as he was cascading down a steep slope that led to a narrow bridge at the bottom of the hill, he saw Lorian unusual phenomenon in those days coming down the opposite slope. It looked like a head-on meeting on the bridge. In his extremity, Mr. Nwich had raised his voice and cried to passing pedestrians, "In the name of God, push me down." Apparently nobody did, and so he added an inducement, "Push me down and my 3 pence is yours." From that day, "Push me down and take my 3 pence" became a popular Annada joke. The minister's speech sounded spontaneous and was most effective. There was no election at hand, he said amid laughter. He had not come to beg for their votes. It was just a family reunion, pure and simple. He would have preferred not to speak to his own kinsmen in English, which was after all a foreign language, but he had learnt from experience that speeches made in vernacular were liable to be distorted and misquoted in the press. Also, there were some strangers in that audience who did not speak our own tongue, and he did not wish to exclude them. They were all citizens of our great country, whether they came from the highlands or the lowlands, etc., etc. The stranger he had in mind, I think, was Mrs. Eleanor John, an influential party woman from the coast who had come in the minister's party. She was heavily painted and perfumed, and although no longer young, seemed more than able to hold her own if it came to that. She sat on the minister's left, smoking and fanning herself. Next to her sat the beautiful young girl I have talked about. I didn't catch the two of them exchanging any words or even looks. I wondered what such a girl was doing in that tough crowd. It looked as though they had stopped by some convent on their way and offered to give her a lift to the next one. At the end of his speech, the minister and his party were invited to the proprietor's lodge, as Mr. Nwich called his square, cement block house. Outside, the dancers had all come alive again, and the hunters, their last powder gone, were tamely waiting for the promised palm wine. The minister danced a few dignified steps to the music of each group and stuck red pound notes on the perspiring faces of the best dancers. To one group alone he gave away £5. The same man who had drawn our attention to the minister's humility was now pointing out yet another quality. I looked at him closely for the first time and noticed that he had one bad eye, what we call a cowrie shell eye. You see how he did do, as if to say money be sansan, he was saying. People way de jealous the money gorment de pay minister no sabi, say no be him one to chop him. Nah. So troe. Later on in the proprietor's lodge, I said to the minister, "You must have spent a fortune today." He smiled at the glass of cold beer in his hand and said, "You call this spend? You never see something, my brother. I know to keep on eeny for myself, na so troe. If some person come to you and say, I want make you minister, make you run like blazes comet. Not true word, I tell you. To God, who made me." He showed the tip of his tongue to the sky to confirm the oath. Ministered is sweet for eye, but too much kata for inside. Believe me, yours sincerely. Big man, big palaver, said the one-eyed man. It was left to Josiah, owner of a nearby shop and bar, to sound a discordant, if jovial, note. "Me one," he said, "I no cook a mind the kata waita for inside. Make you put minister money for my hand and all the wallow on top. I no mind at all." Everyone laughed. Then Mrs. John said, "No be so, my friend, when you done. Experience rich man's trouble, you no fit talk like that again. My people get one proverb. They say that when poor man done see with him own eye how to make big man, e go beg. Make e carry him poverty, de go jeiji. They said this woman was a very close friend of the minister's, and her proprietary air would seem to confirm it, and the fact that she had come all the way from Pacoma, 350 miles away. I knew of her from the newspapers. She was a member of the Library Commission, one of the statutory boards within the minister's portfolio. Her massive coral beads were worth hundreds of pounds according to the whisper circulating in the room while she talked. She was the merchant princess par excellence. Poor beginning an orphan, I believe no school education, plenty of good looks and an iron determination, both of which she put to good account, beginning as a street hawker, rising to a small trader, and then to a big one.
At present, they said, she
presided over the entire trade in imported second-hand clothing worth hundreds of thousands. I edged quietly towards the journalist who seemed to know everyone in the party, and whispered in his ear, "Who is the young lady?" He said, leaving his mouth wide open for a while as a danger signal.
Make.
You no go near ammo. My hand no da, for inside. I told him I wasn't going near ammo. I merely asked who she was. The minister no da introduce Sam to anybody. So I think say na I'm girlfriend or im cousin. Then he confided, I done Lucam sodi I tire. I no go tell. You like girls for this una part sabi fino. God Almighty. I had also noticed that the minister had skipped her when he had introduced his party to the teachers. I know it sounds silly, but I began to wonder what had happened to the Mrs. Nanga of the scoutmastering days.
They were newly married then.
I remembered her, particularly because she was one of the very first women I knew to wear a white lady's helmet, which in our ignorance we called helmet, and which was in those days the very acme of sophistication. Chapter 2. A common saying in the country after independence was that it didn't matter what you knew but who you knew. And believe me, it was no idle talk. For a person like me who simply couldn't stoop to lick any big man's boots, it created a big problem. In fact, one reason why I took this teaching job in a bush private school instead of a smart civil service job in the city with car, free housing, etc., was to give myself a certain amount of autonomy. So when I told the minister that I had applied for a scholarship to do a postgraduate certificate of education in London, it did not even cross my mind to enlist his
help.
I think it is important to stress this point. I had had scholarships both to the secondary school and to the university without any godfather's help but purely on my own merit. And in any case, it wasn't too important whether I did the postgraduate course or not. As far as I was concerned, the important thing was going to be the opportunity of visiting Europe, which in itself must be a big education. My friend Andrew Kadibi, who did the same course the previous year, seemed to have got a big kick out of
it.
I don't mean the white girls, you can have those out here nowadays, but quite small
things.
I remember him saying, for instance, that the greatest delight of his entire visit to Britain was when, for the first time in his 27 years, a white man, a taxi driver, I think, carried his suitcase and said sir to him. He was so thrilled he tipped the man 10 shillings. We laughed a lot about it, but I could so easily see it happen. But much as I wanted to go to Europe, I wasn't going to sell my soul for it or beg anyone to help me. It was the minister himself who came back to the postgraduate question at the end of his reception without any prompting whatever from me.
As a
matter of fact, I tried hard to avoid catching his attention again. And the proposals he made didn't seem to me to be offensive in any way. He invited me to come and spend my holidays with him in the capital, and while I was there he would try and find out from his cabinet colleague, the Minister of Overseas Training, whether there was anything doing. "If you come as soon as you close," he said, "you can stay in my guest room with everything complete: bedroom, parlor, bathroom, latrine, everything self-contained. You can live by yourself and do anything you like there. It's all yours." "Make you no min am shy," said Mrs. John to me. "I can see say you not good.
Boy.
Make you no gree am spoil you. Me I know da for dis bedroom and bathroom. Business, oh. As I see it is monsieur, na vitgetsel. If he tell you stand, make you run." Everybody laughed. "Eleanor, why you want to disgrace me and spoil my name so for public for nothing?"
Sake.
"What an I to you?" Everybody here sabi say me na good Christian. "No be so, James." "Ah, not so, sir," replied the journalist happily. In spite of all this joking, the minister's invitation was serious and firm.
He said it
Was important. I came at once, as he was planning to go to the United States in about 2 months. "They're going to give me doctorate degree," he announced proudly. "Doctor of Laws, LL.D. "That's great," I said. "Congratulations." "Thank you, my brother." "So the minister will become Chief the Honorable Dr. M.A. Nanga," intoned the journalist, a whole second ahead of my own thoughts on the matter. We all cheered the impressive address and its future owner. "You know, see, say the title fit my name, Pem," said the minister with boyish excitement, and we all said yes, it suited him perfectly. "But the man way I like him name Pasna, Chief the Honorable Alhaji Dr. Mongo Sago, MP, said the minister somewhat wistfully. "Him own good too," admitted the incomparable journalist, "but no pass your own, sir. Chief the Honorable Dr. M.A. Nanga, MP, LLD. Nawa. Nothing fit.
Basel.
What about Chief Dr. Mrs.? I threw in mischievously. "That one no sweet for mouth," said the minister. "No catch." "What'n wrong with em?" asked Mrs. John. "Because na woman get no go. Sweet for mouth. I done talk say, not only for election time woman to get equality for dis. Our country." "No be so, madam," said the journalist. "You no see how the title rough like sandpaper for mouth. Dr. Chief Mrs. No catch at all." Before the minister left, he made sure I took down his residential address in the capital. I felt Mr. Nweed's malevolent eyes boring into me as I wrote it down, and hardly were the farewells out of his mouth before he turned to me and asked sneeringly if I was still of the opinion that it was unnecessary to be introduced to the minister. What I objected to was standing in a line like school children, I said, somewhat embarrassed. In any case, I didn't need to be introduced. We knew each other already. "You can thank your stars that I am not a wicked man," he continued as though I had said nothing. Otherwise, I would have told him. "Why don't you run after him now?" I asked. "He cannot have gone very far." With that, I walked away from the obsequious old fool. But when I came to think of the events of the day, I had to admit that Mr. Nweed had not had fair returns for all his trouble. I don't think the minister gave him as much as a second to raise any of his own problems, and it was uncharitable, I thought, for him to have joined in as loudly as he had done in the push-me-down laughter. For the sake of appearances, at least, he should have kept a straight face. It was clear the great man did not easily forgive those who took up part of his time to make their own speeches. He ostentatiously ignored Mr. Nweed for the rest of the day. Poor man! He had probably lost the chance of getting on that new corporation for the disposal of dilapidated government wares with which he was no doubt hoping to replace the even more worn-out equipment in his school. So although it was unreasonable for him to have turned his anger on me, there was no doubt he had cause to be angry. Actually, his teachers had let him down badly that afternoon. Apart from myself, there was that MA- opportunity, incident which for some obscure reason seemed to have annoyed the minister even more than Mr. Nwege's long speech. At least he contained the latter annoyance with laughter. And to crown Mr. Nwege's discomfitures, his senior tutor, a man in his 60s, had sallied out of the lodge with one bottle of beer under each armpit, to the amusement of everyone except Mr. Nwege, who had clearly not gone out of his way to buy beer at its present impossible price for members of his staff to
take home.
The senior tutor, by the way, was a jolly old rogue who could get away with anything if need be by playing the buffoon. He was a great frequenter of Josiah's bar across the road. He had a fine sense of humor, like when he asked why so many young people traveled to Britain to be called to the bar when he could call them all to Josiah's
bar.
I was lighting my Tilly lamp later that evening when someone knocked on my
door.
"Come in if you are good-looking," I said. "Is Adeline?" asked an unnatural, high-pitched voice.
"Come in, fool," I said.
It was a silly joke, Andrew, and I never tired of playing on each other. The idea was to sound like a girl and so send the other's blood pressure up. "How the go to go?" I asked. "Beau, son of man, done tire." "Did you find out about that girl?" I asked. "Why not so girl? Girl bin full your mouth. Weddin'?
So Person no fit.
Talk any serious talk with you. I never see." "Okay, Mr. Gentleman," I said, pumping the lamp. "Any person way first mention about girl again for this room, make him tongue cut. How is the weather?"
He laughed.
At that point, my houseboy, a 15-year-old rogue called Peter, came in to ask what he should cook for supper. "You no hear the news for 3 o'clock?" I asked, feigning great seriousness. "Sir, government done pass new law say not only 2 times a day person go to chop.
Now.
For morning and for afternoon. Finish."
He laughed.
"That is next to impossibility," he said. Peter liked his words long. He had his Standard 6 certificate, which 2 or 3 years before could have got him a job as a messenger in an office or even a teacher in an elementary school. But today there simply aren't any jobs for his kind of person anymore, and he was lucky to be a sort of housekeeper to me for £1 a month, including, of course, free board and lodging. He spent most of his spare time reading, although his favorite literature is of a very dubious kind. I once found him reading a strange book he had just received from India. I think it was called How to Solve the Fair Sex, and had cost him no less than 10 shillings, excluding postage from New Delhi. I had roundly rebuked him. I couldn't think what to eat, so I told him to go and roast me some yams. "Roast yams at night?" screamed Andrew. "If you knock at my door in the middle of the night, I shan't wake up." This was a crude reference to the night I had a violent stomachache after eating half a dozen roasted corn. I had been so scared I had gone and called Andrew up to take me to hospital in his ancient car. "What do you suggest I eat then?" I asked him. "Am I your wife? Don't you see all the girls waiting for husbands? Don't you fear. I have my eyes on one right now." "True?
Give me Tori. Who is she?"
"What about the poem?" "The same," I said, and we recited together a poem one of our acquaintances had composed for his wedding invitation card. It's time to spread the news abroad that we are well prepared to tie ourselves with silvery cord of sweet conjugal bond. "Look at this small pickin'," said Andrew in pretended anger to Peter, who had joined our laughter. "How dare you laugh with your elders?" "Sorry, sir," said Peter, frowning comically. "What do you think I should eat, Peter?" I asked. Anything master talk. Like jollof rice, sir. I knew. Whenever you allowed him a say in this matter, he invariably came up with jollof rice, his favorite dish. Okay, I said. 1 cup of rice, not 1.5, not 1.25. Yes, sir, he said, and went away happily. I knew he would cook at least 2 cups. Who is she? I said. Who? The girl with the minister. His girlfriend. I see. Actually, it's more than that. He is planning to marry her according to native law and custom. Apparently his missus is too bush for his present position, so he wants a bright new parlor wife to play hostess at his parties. Too bad. Who told you all this? Somebody. Too bad. Without knowing anything whatever about that girl, I feel she deserves to be somebody's first wife, not an old man's mistress. Anyway, it's none of my business. He sent her to a women's training college, said Andrew.
So he has been
planning it for a few years at least. I feel sorry for her. That man has no conscience. I said nothing. Imagine such a beautiful thing wasting herself on such an empty-headed ass. I so enjoyed wounding his pride. Did you see how wild he looked? Yes, I said. You hit him hard. Actually, I was amused how Andrew was desperately trying to convince himself and me that he had gone to the reception with the avowed intention to deflate his empty-headed countryman. He seemed to be forgetting, in a hurry, that he had earlier refused to support me at the staff meeting when I had objected to Mr. Nweed's stupid plans. Just think of such a cultureless man going abroad and calling himself Minister of Culture. Ridiculous. This is why the outside world laughs at us. That is true, I said, but the outside world isn't all that important, is it? In any case, people like Chief Nanga don't care 2 hoots about the outside world. He is concerned with the inside world, with how to retain his hold on his constituency, and there he is. Adept, you must admit. Anyway, as he told us today, Churchill never passed a school certificate. I see the offer of free lodging is already having its effect. I began to laugh, and Andrew joined in. You could tell at a glance that he knew me, in a way that Mr. Nweed didn't. It was one thing to tease me for accepting the minister's offer of accommodation, but I just didn't want anybody to think that Adelai Samala was capable of stooping to obtain a scholarship in any underhand way. In the words of my boy, Peter, it was next to impossibility. Andrew knew, of course, that I had long been planning to go to the capital, and he knew about Elsie. Well, Elsie. Where does one begin to write about her? The difficulty in writing this kind of story is that the writer is armed with all kinds of hindsight which he didn't have when the original events were happening. When he introduces a character like Elsie, for instance, he already has at the back of his mind a total picture of her entrance, her act, and her exit. And this tends to color even the first words he writes. I can only hope that, being aware of this danger, I have successfully kept it at bay. As far as is humanly possible, I shall try not to jump ahead of my story. Elsie was, and for that matter still is, the only girl I met and slept with the same day, in fact within an hour. I know that faster records do exist, and am not entering this one for that purpose, nor am I trying to prejudice anyone against Elsie. I only put it down because that was the way it happened. It was during my last term at the university, and having as usual put off my revision to the last moment, I was having a rough time. But one evening there was a party organized by the Students' Christian Movement, and I decided, in spite of my arrears of work, to attend and give my brain time to cool off. I am not usually lucky, but that evening I was. I saw Elsie standing in a group with other student nurses and made straight for her. She turned out to be a most vivacious girl newly come to the nursing school. We danced twice, then I suggested we took a walk away from the noisy highlife band, and she readily agreed. If I had been left to my own devices, nothing might have happened that day. But no doubt without meaning to, Elsie took a hand in the matter. She said she was thirsty, and I took her to my rooms for a drink of water. She was one of those girls who send out loud cries in the heat of the thing. It happened again each time. But that first day it was rather funny, because she kept calling, "Ralph, darling." I remember wondering why Ralph. It was not until weeks later that I got to know that she was engaged to some daft fellow called Ralph, a medical student in Edinburgh. The funny part of it was that my next-door neighbor in English honors student and easily the most ruthless and unprincipled womanizer in the entire university campus changed to calling me Ralph from that day.
He was known to most students by
his nickname, Ir, which was short for irresponsible. His most celebrated conquest was a female undergraduate who had seemed so inaccessible that boys called her unbreakable. Ir became interested in her and promised his friends to break her one day soon. Then, one afternoon we saw her enter his rooms. Our hall began to buzz with excitement as word went round, and we stood in little groups all along the corridor, waiting. Half an hour or so later, Ir came out glistening with sweat, closed the door quietly behind him, and then held up a condom bloated with his disgusting seed. That was Ir for you, eh? Real monster. I suppose I was somehow flattered by the notice a man of such prowess had taken of Elsie's cry. When I confided to him later that Ralph was the name of the girl's proper boyfriend, he promptly changed to calling me Assistant Ralph, or, if Elsie was around, simply AR. Despite this rather precipitous beginning, Elsie and I became very good and steady friends. I can't pretend that I ever thought of marriage, but I must admit I did begin to feel a little jealous any time I found her reading and rereading a blue British Air letter with the Red Queen and Houses of Parliament stamped on its back. Elsie was such a beautiful, happy girl, and she made no demands whatever. When I left the university, she was heartbroken, and so was I for that matter. We exchanged letters every week or 2 weeks at the most. I remember during the postal strike of 1963, when I didn't hear from her for over a month, I nearly kicked the bucket, as my boy, Peter, would have said. Now she was working in a hospital about 12 miles outside Bori, and so we arranged that I should spend my next holidays in the capital and take the bus to her hospital every so often while she would be able to spend her days off in the city. That was why the minister's offer couldn't have come at a more opportune moment. I had, of course, 1 or 2 bachelor friends in the capital who would have had no difficulty in putting me up, but they weren't likely to provide a guest room with all amenities. For days after the minister's visit, I was still trying to puzzle out why he had seemed so offended by his old nickname, minus opportunity. I don't know why I should have been so preoccupied with such unimportant trash. But it often happens to me like that. I get hold of some pretty inane thought or a cheap tune I would ordinarily be ashamed to be caught whistling, like that radio jingle advertising an intestinal worm expeller, and I get stuck with it. When I first knew Mr. Nanga in 1948, he had seemed quite happy with his nickname. I suspect he had in fact invented it himself. Certainly, he enjoyed it. His name being M.A. Nanga, his fellow teachers called him simply and fondly M.A., he answered. Minus opportunity, which he didn't have to do unless he liked it. Why then the present angry reaction? I finally decided that it stemmed from the same general anti-intellectual feeling in the country. In 1948, Mr. Nanga could admit, albeit light-heartedly, to a certain secret yearning for higher education. In 1960, for he was valiantly proving that a man like him was better without it. Of course, he had not altogether persuaded himself, or else he would not have shown such excitement over the Doctor of Laws arranged for him from some small backstreet college. Chapter 3.